Welcome, guys. Today I have a really interesting and fun treat for you guys. Some of you know that I've been doing several videos on Nietzsche. But today, if you guys didn't know, I am currently a religious studies major in the University of Arizona. I have I have an introduction to Buddhism. Not an introduction, but I have a Buddhist meditation class and I have a Buddhist Buddhism in Japan class. So I'm getting, kind of like my roots and getting acquainted in Buddhism while I'm sort of being in these classes. But there's something that I had to read for next week's lecture and so on, and discussion that sort of addressed some of the basic fundamentals of Buddhism. Now, the reason why I bring this up and Nietzsche up is I came across some concepts that I found to be quite troublesome, in the sense of that Buddha could actually have a adequate, or you could say, you could say almost an equal response of opposition to Nietzsche's own position. And what is Nietzsche's own position? So we'll just start from there. Nietzsche's position, from what we know, and thus spoke Zarathustra, is that there's something called the eternal recurrence of the same, right? Where basically everything is subjected to time, right? Everything changes. Now, there is some very interesting parallels between Nietzsche and Buddhism, right? We can kind of clearly, if you know some things about Buddhism, you can kind of tell there is some similarities, right? But there is very distinct differences, and I think this is what I'm going to try to get at today. But yeah, so Nietzsche's eternal recurrence of the same. Basically, everything is subjected to time. Everything sort of becomes annihilated. And so Nietzsche's response to this is creating, right? And the overman, right? The concept of the overman. Now, I'm not going to go too deep. If you don't know the Nietzschean concepts, this is not the video for you. And the same thing, if you don't know too much of the Buddhist concepts, this is also not going to be the video for you. But at the same time, at least I will be able to help you out with some of the Buddhist stuff. But if you still want to watch and sort of get a gauge on what the Buddha would say to Nietzsche, possibly, right? This is the speculation. What would the Buddha say to Nietzsche? And this is what I try to construct for this video, and hopefully it's helpful. Hopefully it brings up a paradigm that is almost like, chicken or egg kind of thing. I'm hoping to present this argument in a chicken or egg fashion, that there seems to be arguments from both sides that is kind of fascinating here. Okay, so yes. So Nietzsche says everything is subject to time, everything repeats in this sense, right? And so you have to just create values and become the overman, and the only way to sort of overcome any of this is creating through the will, right? Will to power, and so on. Okay. Now, and also, before I go into this, also, Nietzsche is very big on affirmation, right? Just affirming. Maybe I shouldn't have said affirmation. That's sort of a new age word. But so we must go affirming basically anything that causes suffering and pain. And so, and this is necessary for Nietzsche, because suffering and pain is also what feeds the creative will, right? So far, so good. Okay, so far, so good. Now, if we know some basic concepts about Buddhism. Buddhism's end goal is to end the cycle of rebirth, life and rebirth, right? Life and death, the rebirth cycle, right? Is to end that through nirvana, right? Now, Nietzsche's obvious critique of Buddhism for Nietzsche is that you're not affirming life then if you are trying to break the cycle of birth and death, right? That's going to be Nietzsche's critique of Buddhism, right? So it's like a false affirmation, right? Buddhism for Nietzsche is probably going to be a false affirmation, right? Because basically up to this point, Buddhism and Nietzsche are very close, I have to say. It's very, very close. Extremely close. But it's like right there where that's like the big difference, right? Where Nietzsche would extremely disagree, right? That actually trying to break the cycle of death and life, rebirth, that now you're just running away. Now you're not even affirming life, right? You're trying to go somewhere beyond, right? And remember, Nietzsche's understanding of the Overman is the meaning of the earth. So there's something very grounding about Nietzsche in this sense, right? We can't be escaping through abstract notions. Now, however, what would the Buddha say in response to Nietzsche? And this is where it gets interesting. So in my textbook from Shaw, Introduction to Buddhist Meditation, Buddha presents basically two views that he still calls wrong views, right? One is called eternalism, and the other is called annihilationism. So just to introduce us into those concepts, eternalism is basically this: if there is a fixed view that things are permanent, having a lasting identity, and go on forever, then the natural flux of the world is ignored, and there is wrong view. The Buddha called this view eternalism. Okay, so Buddha would agree with Nietzsche, right? With this idea, most of the Christian conception of a view that God is unchanging, right? Buddha might have this sense of, but like, oh, that's kind of wrong, in the sense of like, if everything is permanent in that sense. Now, I think there's a lot of nuances that we could go into, or a lot of digressions that we could go into about, this is not to address Christian conceptions, really. In my opinion, both Christian conceptions hold identity and flux, but it would seem that Nietzsche's reaction to Christianity is that Christianity is stuck in a permanent, lasting identity, right? That's Nietzsche's problem. And Buddha would agree, right? Because this is what Buddha would call eternalism, okay? Now, Nietzsche's proposal of the eternal recurrence of the same, that everything is sort of subjected to time and sort of becomes annihilated through time. Here's Buddha's response to this. But if there is a fixed view that in changing all the time, now this isn't a direct quote from Buddha, this is sort of like a summary. I just want to make sure that's very clear. This is a summary from my book. This is not a direct quote from the Buddha. I just want to really make that clear. Okay, let's continue. But if there is a fixed view that in changing all the time, things have no coherence or continuity and no self at all, that is also wrong view. This was termed by the Buddha annihilationism. Now, I think there's a lot of arguments that can go back and forth for Nietzsche, for Buddha. What's fascinating here is I think the Buddha would say that Nietzsche's conception of the eternal recurrence of the same is wrong based on the fact that for Nietzsche has no permanence in his whole conceptual project, right? There is no permanence. That's the whole point. You can't escape it. There is no permanence. Now, the Buddha would disagree, right? The Buddha's understanding of what we would call, more of the middle way would be to sort of hold flux and identity at the same time. Really, you'd acknowledge both, identity and flux. Now, the real question is, could it be argued that Nietzsche does think flux and identity? Isn't the very fact that everything is always subjected to time, isn't this also a very permanent concept that everything is changing? These are arguments that could be put back forth. In many ways, I think these arguments back and forth between Buddha and Nietzsche would really present a very interesting paradigm in terms of responses, right? They would both turn each other on their heads by their responding. But I do think from the initial just looking at the text of what I have here, I do think Nietzsche would fall under what Buddha would call wrong view, right? It's a fixed view. It's a fixed view. And so notice how we've been talking about fixed view, fixed view and wrong view. So what's right view, right? And this is part of the Eightfold Path of views for Buddhism. And so one of the very first paths is called right view. And so right view is basically this, right? Not to see the world through rigid lenses, opinions and judgments, but to be able to look and watch without forming views, right? So here we get maybe a clearer understanding of why Buddha would be sort of against Nietzsche's understanding, right? Because here Nietzsche's very much forming a view. But I think Nietzsche's response would be, well, I'm creating a view, right? And then I throw it away. So in that sense, I'm not having any static understanding. But I think it could be argued again, and from the Buddha's position, that he is having a fixed view, because obviously he has the eternal recurrence of the same. The concept of the eternal recurrence of the same is rigid. Even the very fact of something always becoming annihilated and then annihilated again, that's a rigid view, right? The very fact that this happens all the time, right? Where's the balance? Where's the otherness? So more explanation on the right view. It is said this, right? The right view is this. It doesn't impose a rigid form, so that emergent and new identities can be respected and both flux and identity can be acknowledged. So both flux and identity. Now again, from whatever position that we want to argue from, right? I think we can both make a case that in some ways, if the Buddha were to respond to Nietzsche, Nietzsche would be like, no. But if Nietzsche would respond to Buddha, Buddha would also say no, right? I think if accusations were thrown, not to say the Buddha would necessarily accuse, because obviously that's not in line from what we know of the Buddha's character. But we can kind of get a gauge that both of them would have disagreements, and I think both of them would sort of possibly have these notions of like, actually you misunderstand what I'm saying, right? But here again, I'm just simply trying to present what would Buddha say to Nietzsche. So there we have it, with kind of addressing Nietzsche's fixed view on the eternal recurrence of the same, right? Now, if we go back to the very early argument that Nietzsche would have against Buddhism, where the Buddha's concept of breaking the cycle of life and death, of rebirth, in order to reach by reaching nirvana. Nietzsche would also, again, like we said before, Nietzsche would have a problem with this, right? Why are we trying to run away from pain when pain and suffering are the very things that contribute to our creative wills? It's the will to power. It's really the only way to sort of affirm anything in the world through the eternal recurrence of the same, right? Now, the Buddha would say, right, it's not that we're running away from suffering and pain. And here's a direct quote from my book here. It says, "It is argued by the Buddha that the very fact that we feel that things are not quite as we would like them, impermanent and sometimes unsatisfactory, is because some part of us knows and intuitively recognizes what it would be like to be free from these conditions. Later Buddhist traditions formulate this in terms of latent knowledge." So there you go. That's the Buddha's response to Nietzsche, right? Where Nietzsche would say, no, you're running away, right? You're doing this horrible thing of running away from pain and suffering, right? But Buddha would say, look, pay attention. Why do people want to escape suffering and pain? Why do they intuitively do this, right? Now, I think this is an argument here from intuition, right? And what's crazy is, if you think about it, the Buddha's explanation seems more in line with our experience, where Nietzsche's understanding of affirming pain seems more contrary to our subjective experience. That's just simply an observation that I've acknowledged, right? Because if you think about it, it wouldn't just be Buddhism that does this. It would also be Christianity and other religions. Now, keep in mind, Zoroastrianism also has some of the same basic concepts of Christianity, this notion of resurrection, and I learned this in my Middle Eastern class, notion of resurrection, notion of a coming Messiah, and so on. So it is interesting that thus spoke Zarathustra is supposed to be rooted from Zoroaster, right? But yet Zoroastrianism has the same concepts of escaping, what Nietzsche would call escaping life and suffering, right? The very fact of trying to looking forward for this coming Messiah, looking forward for this resurrection and being away and finally overcoming suffering and pain, right? But again, I think quantitatively, I can't say that word right now. I think in accumulation, if we take religion as a whole, right, ranging from the Abrahamic religions from Buddhism and Hinduism and so on, it would seem actually in accumulation all is against Nietzsche's understanding of affirming life by not trying to escape suffering, right? They would be sort of all against that. Now, I think the counter-argument that still Buddha would have for Nietzsche, and this has to do with a long misconception of, because most of the time that we look at Buddhism tries to stop desire, right? Stop desiring, and then you stop suffering, and so on. But actually, in my class, this second noble truth, which is called craving, actually, it's basically the simile to desire. Craving, actually, to stop craving, to stop desire, actually means to stop wishing for things other than what they already are, right? So this is really the affirmation part, and I think Nietzsche would agree, right, that you can't stop wishing, that you need to stop wishing for things other than what they are, right? And I think that this is where people sort of have some misunderstanding of Buddhism where they think, well, isn't obviously stopping desire, isn't that a desire? But if we put it in terms of actually the desire is to stop desires that wish for things other than what they are, other than what is already presented, right? And so in that case, Buddhism and Nietzsche are very much aligned, right? We can't wish for things other than what they are, right? So, and now I know the way, this is really going to be the end of the video here. But I just really wanted to present the view and not really argue for the Buddha. But as you notice, I really tried to argue I tried. Can't say that I succeeded necessarily, but I tried to argue from Nietzsche's position and Buddha's position, where we can see, sort of back and forth, hopefully, how maybe this is, there's something missing. We could say, where's creating in Buddhism, right? Where's that notion of creating in Buddhism? But I think if we were to attack that so fast, we might quickly misunderstand Buddhism. And the same thing with Nietzsche, right? If we were to attack Nietzsche so quickly, it's possible we might understand Nietzsche as well. So, yeah, I just really wanted to present it in this way, so that way you guys could kind of see, like, really, really just the creative thought of what Buddha would say to Nietzsche. And the possibility of the disagreements between the two and how that possibly would manifest. But in my opinion, I think there is ultimately something irreconcilable about them both. But it is interesting that when we take account and accumulation of all these religions that sort of have this look of beyonding, I think Buddha has a very good phenomenological, or at least a good intuitive explanation for this, is the very fact that there is some kind of latent knowledge that we know about what it means to be free from these conditions. You could say, actually, this can even be used against Nietzsche in the same way. The very fact that Nietzsche still finds a way to be free from these conditions is by just simply affirming it, right? So in some way, Nietzsche still kind of knows how to be free from these conditions, right? Why is nihilism such a problem? Is because it seems like we can't escape we can't escape it, right? And yet we still try to find a way to escape it, either through paradoxically accepting it, or through kind of doing a negation of negation in some kind of fashion. But anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed that video. Take care.